Do you know what the most often quoted verse of the Bible is in our day? I suspect it is, "Judge not that you be not judged." We tend to come up with that verse quite often. Even those who really don't put much stock in the Bible are very familiar with that statement, "You ought not to judge." It's interesting that the Bible doesn't just have that single statement about judging. It says a whole lot on that particular theme. Over in John chapter 7 and verse 24, Jesus will say, "Don't judge by just appearance, but judge correctly, judge righteously." One of my favorite teachings about the whole topic of judgment is found in James chapter 2, beginning in verse 12. And James said, we're going to be judged by that law that gives freedom. But he that judges without mercy will be shown no mercy in the judgment of the Lord. And so we need to be ones that judge mercifully when we make judgments. Do you realize that when someone condemns someone else for judging, that they're judging? The reality is that you can hardly go through life without making judgments on different matters. The Bible even teaches that as a Christian, we ought to examine ourselves on a regular basis to make certain that we really are in accord with the will of God. We're even told in taking of the Lord's Supper that one ought to examine himself first of all and then eat of that bread or drink of that cup. So there is a kind of judging that is extremely important that I ought to do, and yet it's not my job to decide the eternal destiny of other people. It's not my right to say that this individual is going to be lost in eternity, because I don't have that judgment in my hands. I'm not the judge. I'm not the prosecuting attorney. I'm just one that's a fellow defendant. The reality is that I don't sit on the jury to make a decision about someone else's eternity. But I do need to know that there's some kinds of judgment that are extremely important. Remember in that text where Jesus said, "Judge not that you be not judged." He goes on to say, "For with the same judgment you judge others, you yourself will be judged." And so he said, don't be the one that looks for a speck or a bit of sawdust in your brother's eye when you've got a beam in your own eye. First of all, get the beam out of your own eye that you might be able to see more clearly to get that speck out of your brother's eye. Now please note in that he didn't say, just leave the speck alone. Instead, he said, you look at yourself first. You first of all correct the things that are wrong in your life, and then you can see better to help the other individual that is dealing with a speck in their eye. And so he does teach that even in that statement, there's to be some judgment, but I do need to know that if I'm judging others by a standard, I'm going to be judged by the same one. And I need to judge myself first before I make judgment of somebody else. Remember a statement made by Paul over in 1 Corinthians 4. He was talking about his stewardship before God and how that God had given to him a ministry. And then he makes this statement. It's a very small thing, in my view, that I should be judged by you. I don't even judge myself, he said. I don't know anything against me. My conscience is clean. And yet he said, he that judges me is the Lord. Here's the standard to look at. It's not all that important. It's not very important at all how others see us. It's a very small thing that I should be judged by you. We spend entirely too much time and energy worried about what others think about us. The reality is they seldom think of us at all. They're thinking more about themselves instead of about us. So don't worry so much about what others think. Then secondly, don't put too much stock in what you think. Paul said, I don't judge myself. I don't know anything that's wrong in my life. My conscience is clean. It ought to be. If I realize there are things wrong in my life, I ought to be the one that's immediately about trying to change those things. But I do need to know that the fact I don't know anything negative about myself or bad about myself doesn't mean there's not anything about my life that needs to change. He that judges me is the Lord. And so I need constantly to be going to the mirror of the Word of God, looking often, and then comparing my life not with what I see in others. Comparing my life with Jesus, yes, but even more comparing my life with what it ought to be, what it could be with the help of God. When I look at where I am in comparison to where I could be or where I ought to be, then I can see correctly the matters that need to be changed, and I can begin to move in the right direction.